Hi, my name is Michael Robblee, and I'm a ruling elder at Sterling Presbyterian Church in Sterling, Virginia. And this is Phil Proctor, the teaching elder, our pastor. And we are here for episode 2 of Paradoxy. And we're going to be talking about the times that we find ourselves in and how the scripture speaks into our experiences. And Phil, you were telling me a little earlier about an article that you had read recently. I wonder if you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was in USA Today, and it struck me the headline was a horrible headline. It said, "What does the church have to say? Nothing." But the article itself is by N.T. Wright, and he picked up on, when we have these big national tragedies, international tragedy in this case, what is the meaning? What does the church have to say? And he suggested that the Psalms of Lament were the appropriate response. And there was a lot of pushback from people in circles that I'm familiar with that no, this is not the appropriate way to go. But I thought, the Psalms of Lament, you think of the Psalms, they're like a jar of jelly beans. And so if there's a jar of jelly beans there, I've got my favorites that I go to, Psalm 1, Psalm 23, portions of Psalm 119. And I kind of see the Psalms of Lament, both metaphorically and whatnot, as they're the black licorice jelly beans. And I don't like licorice. So in a bowl of jelly beans, if I'm picking and choosing all the way down, I'm not going to get the black licorice ones. Right. And I kind of feel that way with the Psalms of Lament a lot of times. Because in all honesty, you read, this Psalm 74, "Oh God, why do you cast us off forever? Why does your anger smoke against the sheep of your pasture?" I don't really feel that way. I may be depressed, right, but this is like an extreme version of depression that I don't really sense. Psalm 88, another of the Psalms of Lament. "You've caused my companions to shun me. You've made me a horror to them. I am shut in so that I cannot escape. My eye grows dim through sorrow." Yeah. I feel like I'm on the outside looking in when I encounter these intense laments, right, like this. And so I don't go to them as often as I should. And I think, when you're feeling good, you're obviously not going to go to a Psalm of Lament. When you're feeling down, you kind of feel like you're going there and saying, "Oh, well, I don't have it as bad as him," so there's not a connection there. Yeah. And so kind of, how do we use the Psalms of Lament? How do we use them in our own lives and in the church? And so that's kind of what's been going over in my mind recently.
Yeah, I wonder if I could go back just a little bit and ask, what are the Psalms of Lament? Are they a particular set that are all in a row, or a particular author?
They're scattered throughout the Bible, and a number of different authors. David writes, I've scattered throughout the Psalter.
Sure.
David writes a Psalm of Lament. Psalm 74 is a maskil of Asaph. Psalm 88, which is the most depressing psalm in the entire Bible, okay, is the sons of Korah. Okay. And it's the only Psalm of Lament which does not end with any hope. Okay. Psalm 88 begins from the beginning and goes all the way through the last verse in Psalm 88. "You have caused my beloved and my friend to shun me. My companions have become darkness." Mm-hmm. And so it's a psalm that just doesn't express any hope at all. Okay. And so as I've been thinking about some of the Psalms of Lament, and particularly these two, I think maybe as a Christian, maybe as a Reformed Christian, maybe as a guy, maybe as a mix of all those things, I'm happy. I'm comfortable with expressing happiness. I'm comfortable with publicly expressing joy, publicly expressing confidence, but publicly expressing despair. I just don't do that.
Right.
I can speak of the sovereignty of God in hard difficulties, hard providences, but I am not comfortable saying I'm crushed and shattered and broken in these circumstances. And yet, so forget who it was. I think maybe Athanasius, who said, when you read the Psalms, you're reading the prayers of Christ. This is the mind of Christ. This is the heart of Christ that's coming through in the Psalter, because he's the one who's speaking primarily. And so in these Psalms of lament, I think of Christ publicly weeping over Jerusalem. And Psalm 74 is about the destruction of Jerusalem. Your foes have roared in the midst of your meeting place. They set up their own signs for signs. They were like those who swing axes in a forest, and all its carved wood they broke down with hatchets and hammers. They set your sanctuary on fire. They profaned the dwelling place of your name, bringing it down to the ground. They said to themselves, we will utterly subdue them. They burned all the meeting places of God in the land. And so this is the utter destruction of the temple, the utter destruction of God's meeting place. And, I picture Christ standing there just weeping over Jerusalem and expressing this lament over Jerusalem. And this is his heart. This is his heart. And I don't think it's mine. I think I observe this, but to see the destruction of the church, to have that brokenness around an unhealthy church. In many ways, all of our churches are unhealthy because we're all unhealthy people. So, if your congregation is facing a split, or if there's, whatever's going on, people are struggling with hidden sin, and the church is not what she should be. Mm-hmm. That's, just by definition, basically. That's what it means to be sanctified. And yet, when I look at the brokenness in my own heart, the brokenness in the church, in God's people, I think the Psalms of Lament here, particularly Psalm 74, tells me, this is what I should be weeping over, is my sin and the brokenness that is around, and not necessarily the circumstances. That's what I tend to weep over. Right. If I'm going to weep, it's going to be because of circumstances that I don't like.
Right.
And yet here, the writer Asaph is clearly just broken over the fact that God's worship. And he goes on to say, we do not see our signs. There's no longer any prophet. There is none among us who knows how long, O God, is the foe to scoff, is the enemy to revile your name forever. And this is a cool verse or image. Why do you hold back your hand, your right hand? Take it from the fold of your garment and destroy them. To him, it seems like God's just sitting there with his hand in his pocket. And he's saying, why? Why are you doing this?
Right.
And in our passion for holiness, in our passion for the purity of the church and for the glory of the church, I think this lament kind of helps me refocus on what it is. Because the Asaph, clearly, the writer, he's in Babylon. This is after the destruction of the temple. He's in Babylon, and he's got a whole lot of things to be broken up about. But what it is that breaks him is the loss of the temple and the loss of the word of prophecy and direction.
Right. As a well-to-do American, there's a couple of things that you've said that I kind of resonate with me. One is I don't frequently have an opportunity to feel like I am participating in what the author in Scripture is talking about, whether it's David destroying 10,000 people, or in these cases that you were just reading from these Psalms of Lament, of feeling really, really depressed and isolated. But you found some poignant verses in there that talked about isolation, about being people wanting to be distanced from you, about you being forced to be shut up and all by yourself, and then also about the temple, the desolation of the temple, which is interrupting the worship of the church. And these are all things that we're actually facing right now. And so we're actually experiencing some things that we are not used to, and yet the Scripture has covered it, and, and it deals with it. You talked about how the Psalms are like a jar of jelly beans, and you may not pick out the black licorice ones if that's not your favorite. What are some ways that we can make sure that we are eating all of the jelly beans in the jar of Scripture so that we are prepared for whatever life throws at us?
Well, I think one thing is being intentional and systematic about reading through the Scripture. Don't use the Psalter like a jar of jelly beans. I think it's helpful. There's a book by O. Palmer Robertson, The Flow of the Psalms, and he makes the case, and I think does it very well, that the Psalter is intended, the way that it's structured is intended to be read all the way through, and there is a connection between them. Certainly the Psalms of Ascent at the end is pretty much everybody recognizes the connections there. But I think coming to these passages of lament and being familiar with them and understanding that at its heart, this is what Christ prayed. We are looking into the suffering of Christ when we come to these Psalms of lament. And I think of Psalm 88, and when he was in the garden and sweat drops of blood. If you want to know what was on his heart, Psalm 88, O Lord God of my salvation, I cry out day and night before you. Let my prayer come before you. Incline your ear to my cry, for my soul is full of troubles. My life draws near to Sheol. I'm counted as those who go down to the pit. I'm a man who has no strength, like one set loose among the dead, like the slain that lie in the grave, like those whom you remember no more, for they are cut off from your hand. This is very much us being able to look into the heart of Christ and to recognize what he took for us. This wasn't just, Christ's passive obedience was not simply because he was being a role model for us. His passive obedience, his suffering, was something that caused that he took for us, and it gives us a good look into his mind and his heart.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that back around. You were saying that maybe it was Athanasius. I know I read a more recently published book by Dr. Godfrey called Learning to Love the Psalms. He references Palmer Robinson's book that you mentioned there as well, and he picks up probably what Athanasius said about these being the prayers of Jesus Christ. And so as you brought us back to that concept, as we're probably a little short on time, would you help us see how we can read not only the prayers of Jesus Christ here and the laments of Jesus Christ here, but what hope we have looking at that.
Right. Yeah. So to understand, the depths of Christ's suffering, you've got to take it in the context of the entire work of Christ, his active and passive obedience applied to us, his death, but his resurrection, his ascension, beginning a series in the book of Revelation, and that very first image that John sees of Jesus Christ is clothed in the high priest's robe, but with the belt girded around his breast. And you gird the belt around your breast when you're resting, when you're done. You gird it around your waist when you're working. And so that first image that he sees of Christ is that great high priest who is the God of all ages. And so I think in these Psalms of Lament we can see some of the depths, get a glimpse of some of the depths into which he went but also remember that in the light of the glory that is now His and who intercedes for us.
Very good. Well, thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thanks. I appreciate the work you guys are doing.